All right, welcome back. We are doing round two with Jordan Smith. Really appreciate you being willing to come on and share some things, Jordan. It was really enjoyable talking through a lot of things last time as far as kind of navigating personal identity and belief systems. So, for those of you listening, today we're going to get into more of Jordan's journey of transitioning out of a religious background and talk through some of the struggles that came with it, and ultimately, Jordan, how you found peace and clarity. We'll talk about some of the lessons and thoughts on parenting, and how you continue to embrace growth and trust yourself in the process. I look forward to continuing the conversation today. So let's jump right into things.
Yeah, it was totally where I was at, and I was I was instantly suspicious of all other religions because, like, I'm sure they're going to have their issues. And one big part that characterized what happened to me next was the really like understanding how betrayed I felt. Like, I realized that I had lived my entire life for an organization and did what that organization told me because I believed in it, and they had basically done all of that on false pretense. And I was like, I just gave my first 30 years basically to a lie. And I want nothing to do with any more lies. I want to just live my life based on solid things that we actually know. And like, it was almost, I couldn't even read a fiction book. Like, I was like, I have no more time for fiction. Like, I don't even want to read a fantasy novel at this point, which I love, like sci-fi fantasy stuff. Like, who doesn't love reading Lord of the Rings? I was like, I don't even have time for that. I've wasted 30 years on a fiction. All I want to know is what's actually real. I read a lot of books about science, basically catching up on all the things I'd missed being a person of faith. Um, and I just didn't ever want that to happen again. I didn't ever want to put all my chips onto one corner and then be wrong. And so I just tried to diversify my knowledge as much as I possibly could, podcast, books, all that stuff. Um, and that very much characterized where I went, how I found my new moral compass, and how I'm, I guess, eventually now raising my kids. But yeah, I mean, along the way, you discover important stuff about yourself, important stuff about the world. And one of the most meaningful things, I don't know if this is what you want to go into next, but one of the most meaningful things for me was, we had the plan of salvation as, LDS kids growing up. And that was a very powerful thing for me, like just kind of knowing where I came from, what the purpose of life is, and where I'm going. And like getting, like, removing that from my life felt like that was gutting. Like, oh, well, what's like, I felt myself like becoming very nihilistic. Like, well, what's the point? Like, why do we even get up in the morning? And um, one of the things that was helpful to me, and this is a strange thing for me to think about, like it being super powerful and meaningful for me, but it was, and it still is. I read a book called *Sapiens*, which is an incredibly popular book, and it basically outlines um, the history, the narrative, I guess, is what he creates in the book, is like a narrative of human history, like where we actually came from, biologically speaking, and how we got to where we are as a society now, based on certain, artifacts, like certain archaeological facts that we know. And that to me was so powerful, just like giving myself an actual, it's not the plan of salvation, like it doesn't have a happy ending, but at least understanding from a more like factually based context where I actually came from helped me understand who I was now. Like, I'm a biological human, and I have all these wants and drives that were passed down for me from millennia of years of evolution and people sweating it out and dying and moving and raising their family in different places and immigrating, and like that is my actual history. And a lot of who I am as a emotional being and a physical being is because of that. And just understanding that story and giving myself an actual context of like, this is what my reality is. This is why I feel things, and this is why I have, emotions and things that come up. And it was a powerful experience reading that book. And it gave me a new context to operate inside the world. And I think since that, I kind of moved forward with a little bit more confidence. So yeah, big plug for that book for anyone who's like missing the plan of salvation.
Yeah, I love I absolutely love Sapiens. It was my undergrad degree was in biology, and so the root of biology is evolution, and so it's a big way that I view the world. For me, even uh, capitalism is um, you know highly rooted in evolution as far as natural selection, that process. And so it's very interesting to me to read his book, because it's a very evolutionary point of view where for me the lens through the lens of evolution and natural selection, most of what I looked at is just species, the origin of species, and the growth of the change of the earth and stuff like that. But the thing that was so interesting to me is that he looked at the evolution of society and communication and growth, and in through that same lens. And so it was very entertaining for me, and it spoke to me in a new way, on a new level. um, so I guess one thing that I want to ask you is, in that book he talks about how important it was for humans to have the capacity to believe in things that are not real. So he talks about, how important religion was during certain times in helping people to buy into that there is a higher power, there's a certain god that's in control of, water or the sun, or the how fertile the ground is and the crops of the certain year. That by getting people to buy into a common belief in something that wasn't necessarily real, that allowed them to work together and to really unite for something that was bigger than them, and that ultimately, that is a big part of what has led to the evolution of our species. And so even today, we believe in things that are not real. We have this $100 bill that's a piece of paper that's relatively worthless as far as its utility, but it's only because we all believe that it has inherent value, that I can go and spend it somewhere. The idea that you can own land or a business, real estate, all of these things that are kind of like, what is a business? Well, it's not a building, it's not the people, it's an entity. What does that mean? Like, a lot of these ideas are made up, um, but it's only because we all believe in them. So I'm curious if, after reading that, if that helps you to reconcile or to see the value in religion or in fiction, or is that something that you just look at and say, oh, it's for some people, not for me? And how do you reconcile that with the fact that you still do believe in things that aren't real per se?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I had to kind of cross pollinate that Sapiens with Christopher Hitchens' book God Is Not Great, which is another great one. But yeah, so he talks about in Sapiens how religion was sort of a natural byproduct of human evolution, and especially societal evolution. How once we became a species that was able to live in communities and farm together and not be nomadic and not move around, that we were these biological specimens that also told stories. We're the only species on the planet that tells stories, and so we're here. We are, we're in a farm in 2000 BC, and your neighbor drops dead, and you don't understand anything about biology or um, disease to know that he died of some virus. But your neighbor dropped dead, and he was your friend, and you needed some meaning and some explanation for that. And so understanding that religion came because we're trying to we're these biological creatures having uh, existential problems, and we also can see the end coming. We're like one of the only species that can talk about death and understand that it's knocked on the door for all of us and it can happen anytime. So we're trying to give meaning to all these experiences during that time period. And so religions came because we started talking about stories. Well, my neighbor died. I didn't know he had a virus, but maybe he did something to uh, piss off the god of thunder and didn't do his farm right, so that's why he died. So we were trying to make meaning out of it, and religion kind of blossoms as a natural byproduct of this environment that we're now living in. And Christopher Hitchens, the way he describes it is very succinct. He says religion was humanity's first explanation of the universe. We're experiencing all these things. We don't know why. We don't have any microbiology. We don't understand what's going on in the stars of the solar system. So we're just trying to figure it out. He's like, so it's our first explanation of the universe, but it's also our worst. And we have much better information now, and we don't necessarily have to believe in these stories. That said, going back to your other point, I don't necessarily agree with Christopher Hitchens on that. I just think it's a very succinct way of putting it. I think that I've kind of come full circle on spirituality. I think I told you last time we spoke about a little lesson we had with our kids where we talked about um, ancient knowledge and how it was the first time in 5 years that I've actually got my LDS quad out, and I showed them, the scriptures, and I also had next to it a book, Marcus Aurelius Meditations book, and the lesson was just about how humanity has evolved based on the stories we've told, and how before people knew how to write or even had a written language, these stories have been passed on for thousands of years. Like I was holding these two books, and like this one's over 2,000 years old. Marcus Aurelius' book is 2,000 years old. We have these stories today because people were willing to have the oral tradition and pass these stories down generation to generation. They went to great lengths to pass these stories down. And I said that they're not literally true. Like they don't have to be literally true to hold meaning, to have significance in our lives. And then I told the story of the Good Samaritan, and I've talked to my kids about this story, and it's kind of a cryptic, weird way of telling a story. You might not understand it because it's not how we talk nowadays. But here's the value, the underlying value of what you do. Like if you see another human being lying in pain and suffering on the ground, it doesn't matter if they're your enemy or not. You can help them, and you should help them. That's what being a human being should mean. And I talked about how that's a beautiful value, and that should transcend religion, and it should transcend faith. Even you don't have to be a person of faith to believe that. And I think that's a very human value, and one that's worth repeating, and one that's worth passing on. Um, and so, like that's kind of where I come full circle on faith. Is I totally believe that faith was the vessel that passed on these important human stories and human values. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible and whatever holy book you want to read that is weird and nonsensical and even wrong. Um, but there are also these amazing highlights of beautiful human values that get passed on, and I 100% don't want to throw that away. There's been painstaking lengths to pass that on and have it today. So why are we going to throw those stories away when we've been lucky enough by history to have them now? So yeah, that's where I'm at now with those kind of things.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think for me, that is a big part of creating peace internally is recognizing the value of things, regardless of their inherent truth. Um, it still, I think, is still important to try and verify or legitimize certain aspects of different views or different beliefs. But I think there is a lot of peace that can come from that point exactly that you said. Um, and I remember talking to others. I don't remember. I'm trying to remember where I heard it, but someone was just arguing the point of how they can learn a lot from Harry Potter, or these other books that are fiction, because I find myself relatively like you. I don't really. It hasn't been since probably like middle school that I really read a lot of fiction books, um, and so I do recognize in myself that sometimes I probably am throwing the baby out with the bathwater in some regards to not being willing to go far enough in that way. So I think there is a lot of value, but I think part of the beauty of this whole realization is that different stories speak to different people, and we should allow each other to um, allow each other the freedom, and not only the freedom like on paper as far as what rights someone has to learn or express certain beliefs or views, but even just as far as our own mental peace of mind, that if we can recognize that point, that different ideas and theologies speak to different people in different ways, and there's something that's going to be incredibly valuable to you that's not to me, and it doesn't make it any less inherently valuable, that it's very subjective. And so when we can allow each other that grace, that ability and recognition that there is different value to different people, and that really we're all trying to get the same things in life as far as like love and growth and acceptance, I think there's a lot of power in adopting that mental approach.
Yeah, and I think that's what's helped me. Um, yeah, I love that. It's helped me, that kind of mentality, because one of the hardest things for me now is just like my familial relationships, like my parents who are still in the church, who I've now been on both sides of that story, and they've still only experienced the LDS version, and so they have a lot of inner turmoil when it comes to dealing with me. I know that about them because that's how I was when I was still believing. Um, but kind of having that as an operating system of allowing them, like it doesn't bother me that they believe what they believe anymore. It used to, um, but just allowing them to be them and loving them regardless of us having different beliefs it's been really powerful. Like, because I know it is meaningful for them, and I want them to. I don't want to change anything about that for them. Um, it still creates some, you know, awkward moments for all of us because that's just the nature of it. But um, I think that allowing, like, not having, because there was a 2 year period when I felt like I was very mad about all of this, and in that 2 year period, I made it a very um, I, I was very intentional about not talking to my parents about that, about anything faith based. And, they noticed changes. Like, obviously, I stopped wearing my garments. My dad brought that up a couple times. And my dad even tried to really have a deep conversation about what was going on with my church attendance and all that stuff. And I told him, and I wasn't going to therapy at that time, but I didn't really understand it. What I was doing was putting up a boundary. But I did. I just told him, Dad, I don't think this is something we should talk about right now. And uh, I tried to not talk about anything faith related because I was so angry and because I valued the relationship. Um, so I abstained from getting into a conversation that could have damaged our relationship, because at the place that I was in during that 2 years after I left was not a good place to talk about that subject. And I've since obviously come to a little bit healthier place with all of that, and it hasn't come up. And I told my parents I'm an open book, and if they ever want to talk about it, they can. But um, I'm also not going to pressure them to go into those subjects either. But I'm now in a place where I'm comfortable talking about whatever with them. But yeah, I had to kind of wait to get to that point.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is also something that's so different for every single person. Every family's culture and dynamic is very different. I've I part of my life, I just enjoy being open and having conversations even when they're very difficult. So the whole time that I was kind of, I got home from my mission, and I told my dad on the first day back, like how challenging my mission was as far as my beliefs and a lot of these things. And so over the years I was pretty open sharing challenges. The day that we made a decision that we were not going to go back to church, I told both of my parents, because I knew it was going to be hard for them to hear, but I just wanted, uh, I don't know. For whatever reason, and I think it depends. It's not black and white. I don't, even when I say that, when I was listening to your experience and not wanting to talk about it, not being in a place, I don't necessarily listen to that and think, that you should have done it my way, that you should have been open and communicated. It's very possible and very, even likely that the way that you approached it was the right thing and led to the best outcome, giving you time to heal and different things. So there's such a, again, we think, I think this is a big part of what I want to share in this, as we talk through these different things over these different episodes and times, is that so many of us are still looking for that black and white. We're still looking for, okay, well, this is the situation I'm in. What is my path forward? Like we
Yeah.
want there to be one answer and one way to work through it. And there just isn't. And that can be challenging, but it can be so freeing to just recognize that you have a lot of options for how you can move forward, that you can look at all of those options and evaluate for yourself, decide what do you want to do, what do you want things to look like, and then just move forward with that. Um, so yeah, I appreciate you sharing uh, that that approach and being able to move forward. Um, the last thing that I really would like to talk about and like to hear is, what is your perception and evaluation of yourself as far as the amount of peace that you've experienced throughout your life? And you can, now that we kind of know a lot about your story and your experience, how would you rate that, throughout your life and during your transition, the last 5, 10 years? What has that felt like, and where are you at now? Where do you see things going in the future? Talk a little bit about that side of the experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have not like gone back and like thought about how the church actually worked for me growing up, because it was easy as I left to see all the problems.
Hmm.
But I think as a child, especially growing up young, before my probably my teenage years, when you start to be a little bit more questioning, I think that it was a wonderful time. Like growing up in this like almost magical worldview, like where you're part of this chosen group and you have all these amazing people around you. The one thing I really do miss about the church is the community. Like growing up, I can still go to my parents' neighborhood. They live in the same house that I grew up, and most of the people who were my youth leaders are still there. Lots of kids in that neighborhood, so the kids will come back. Sometimes I'll see old friends from the neighborhood, and it truly is like this wonderful, like happy memory of growing up inside this very supportive, safe, um, happy community. And like obviously we could talk about the faults all day, but it really was an awesome spot. And I was so lucky to grow up inside of that, loving place. And so I think for my formative years, like it was really I have a very strong sense of happiness and peace growing up. And um, that probably changed a little bit as I became a teenager and started to push boundaries. My parents had rules that my parents had, and getting the pushback there, and maybe rebelling a little bit. Um, Maybe my satisfaction with that system started to change there. But um, obviously, we kind of went through the whole arc of leaving, and I think now I would characterize where I'm at as probably, I mean, the happiest I've ever been, the most calm and peaceful I've ever felt. And, that's not to say life isn't without challenges, but um, yeah, I think we've landed in a spot where, and obviously my arc is even different my, from Mindy's, my wife's arc, and where she's at. But where I'm at now is just a very content, happy place. And I think going forward, like that's kind of, I'm trying to extrapolate for my kids. Like that's my future, is like trying to think about, because now I'm kind of operating on this unknown world of I've never raised kids. No one's ever, their first time raising kids is the only time you get. So you don't get like a trial run, you don't get training. And now I'm doing it in a totally different way than I was raised. So I'm trying to raise my kids, pulling from the values that I love and I treasure from my youth, without kind of all of the baggage that comes along with it. And so when I teach my kids, it's hard when they're young, but you try to throw in the nuance whenever you can. Like they want it black and white too. But I like to. What was the conversation I had with my oldest son? He's a really curious, bright kid, and he always is asking questions about everything. But we'll have these moral discussions sometimes, and he'll just be like, "Hey, Dad, is it bad for me to think this or for someone to do that?" And I don't ever give him a yes and no answer like I was given, which I think he hates. But I think ultimately it's going to help him in life. And I kind of wish growing up that I would have been giving the more gray area, because I think that we all know now, like the world's a very gray place and we all operate in the gray. And so having a black and white worldview kind of sets you up for failure. So I'm trying to work him and all of my kids as they get a little bit older through the gray areas and be like yes and no for some answers, and here's what I think kind of thing, but here's what someone else might think. We actually talk a lot about religion because we live in Utah, and the cousins get baptized, the cousins go to church, grandma goes to church on both sides. Whenever they stay with grandma for the weekend, when we go on a trip or something, they're going to church, so they see it, they're exposed to all of it, so they have questions about it. And so we talk about the good and the bad of it, and we don't. I withhold my opinion a lot of times, and I just let them come up with their own. So I wish that that's kind of what I would have been given the opportunity to do. So that's kind of where we are now, and I think going forward, like we've gotten to a good place um, individually, my wife and I, and hopefully we can collectively move in that same direction. That's kind of my hope.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I find myself pretty similar as far as the approach with parenting, and I think it's my opinion that pretty much everyone is going to grow up and recognize certain aspects later in retrospect and say, "Oh, I wish my parents would have done this a little bit more," and I'm going to do that for my kids. Um, so I think in some ways, I just kind of accept that aspect of things as well. Just that my kids are going to grow up and some point they're going to say, "Oh, my childhood could have been different if my parents would have done X." And so I just kind of acceptance of that, and recognizing that it is not my responsibility to give them the ultimate experience growing up. It's to just allow them to experience what they're going to experience, and to ask questions and to make decisions for themselves. And like ultimately my take on parenting is my only goal, my primary goal is just for myself to love and accept my kids. That's primary. Anything that happens beyond that is a little bit more in the ether, is has to do more with them. What's in my control is to love and accept them regardless of what decisions they make. And I'd love for them to be able to feel like they can come and communicate and ask questions for me, and for me to help them along the way. So I appreciate you sharing that. My the last the last question that I will ask you is, um, what are things that you find yourself focusing on, or that you feel like are very helpful in increasing the amount of peace in your life? Or is that even important to you? Is that a focus, or is there some other question or quest that drives your motivation and your efforts and your actions? How important is peace? And if it is important, what are the things that you find are most helpful?
That's a good question. Um, so I have this. I feel like peace is like my new, just kind of homeostasis, and what I mean is like I feel like as a biological being, I I we're always trying to abstain from pain and seek pleasure, right? That's the whole Freudian thing. But I feel like I operate at a base layer of kind of just contentment and peace. And I don't know if that's just my nature, but I also think that I that's how just like my system operates. Like I try to aim for that, and I make decisions that lead to that. Um, but I guess if I were to go like tips and tricks, like um, I really one thing that was one of the first things that I really started changing after I left the church was a focus on physical fitness and nutrition and health. Because I think I talked about how some of the things inside of the rules of Mormonism led me to make unhealthy decisions and caused me stress that ultimately caused me more physical um, and just physical unwellness. Like I just was unhealthy. There's a lot of stress. I wasn't eating great. I didn't have the bandwidth for exercise. Like I might go to the gym once every month and then remember that I probably should go again. And so regular exercise wasn't a part of my life. Um, and like after we left, my wife and I both got really into just like exercise for longevity's sake and exercise for endorphins. We really we ran a half marathon together in 2020. That was a year after we left. And that was a really fun goal as a couple that we did. Like that was actually Mindy's goal, and she kind of asked me to do it with her, and I was really excited to do that. And so we just kind of had this like natural, um, like gravitation towards our physical well-being, and that translated to have a lot of positive downstream effects in our lives. Um, because we realized that when you're physically well, a lot of things in your emotional world start to get positive changes as well. And so just having that be a part of our lives now and a focus of our lives, we weren't like worried about like callings, we weren't worried about temple attendance, church attendance, and managing a family. And we had a lot less on our plate all of a sudden, and so we were able to focus on some things that we maybe had been neglecting, and that was one of them. And that made a huge impact. I mean, today, like I'm not like a specimen of physical fitness or anything, but it's a daily part of my life that it's something I think about is eating well every day and getting some sort of movement, moving my body, exercising my body in some way every day. And that wasn't on my radar at all before I left. So that's been one of, if I were to make a list of 5 things, that would have been probably number one. Um, Mental health was another. My wife and I needed a lot of help. Like I said, it was a very like our foundation that we built our lives on was gone when we left the church. And so therapy was huge for us when we first left, navigating our new relationship with these new values that we were creating. And then individually, we went to therapy, kind of figuring out what was going on with our emotions, figuring out stuff that maybe happened in our past, um, putting that all in some sort of a context and being able to deal with it in a healthy way. That was very important. And I don't think I mean, there's definitely moments in therapy, especially couples therapy, that I can point to that that saved my marriage and also saved me. And so, like, I can't say that without therapy I would be in a good place today. So that was one that was it was a necessity in my journey out. Um, and I have a lot of friends who I would suggest therapy to, um, because I know that it will make you can basically, it's like the cheat code, it's the shortcut. You know, let's skip the few steps of suffering that you would go through and just get to the positive outcome. Um, so that was a huge thing. Um, Another thing that I really had to deal with almost immediately was just like the idea of death. And that was a staggering one for a while. Like that was hanging over, looming for a long time. Um, and figuring out a way to deal with death um, was, or I mean, not dealing with it, but just accepting it. And it's not like I'm like okay with it now. It's just like, it's a daily acceptance. Like, hey, this might be it. And this is kind of where maybe stoicism has come in to play for me. Um, is really like this new idea of like nothing is guaranteed in terms of your time on this planet. You might die tonight. You might die in the next hour. So whatever you're doing right now is what you should be putting soul focus into, and you know, whatever that is, that's what you need to be focusing on, because nothing else is guaranteed beyond that. And so just kind of having that mentality has sort of helped me be more present in life and try to make my life more meaningful in the moment, and try not to worry about, you know, things I can't control in the future so much. You worry about X, Y, and Z, but just worry about what's the here and now. And that's actually brought a lot of meaning and peace into my life. Is just kind of um, being able to connect with my kids because I am more present and I'm not worried about a million different things. It's helped me be a better parent, and it's helped me be just a better me. Um, so yeah, I think death ultimately led me to stoicism, which is kind of a fun path. But yeah, I think that's been huge.
Yeah. Um, yeah. A lot of what you shared has been very similar to my experience as well. With fitness, focusing on the physical. I think sometimes sometimes we can get a little bit too pulled in a certain direction in life, whether it's like focused so much on career or you know, feeling like we're checking the boxes with spirituality and letting our body, our physical health go. But there is definitely um I think any point in my life when am feeling down, I can kind of like look at these areas of my life with with health, and with spirituality, family time, and development as far as career, or whatever way that I'm trying to grow, and looking at those areas. um you know there's always potential for growth. Um and yeah, it's interesting to think about uh, death, and is it's interesting. A few months ago, I had a dream where I'll have to look at it again because I wrote it down in my journal. But I had a dream where I was with my family. We were in some kind of war, and I had just gotten shot, and I knew I only had like 30 seconds left to live. And
Uh,
I turned to my wife and I was like, "Look, I'm sorry that you're gonna have to go on and finish out life without me, but just know that like I'm not in pain, and I'm excited. I'm really excited to see what's happening next." And it was this really cool. Sometimes dreams can be this really cool experience to go through, but it was really fun because I woke up thinking, wow, that's like, those are some deep thoughts that, I am, sometimes I say that I'm like, it's not that I want to die today, but I am excited to kind of see what happens. And if there's nothing, then I will never know it. And if there is something, and I think there is going to be something, it'll be a really fun experience. I think it just helps me to enjoy whatever there is right now. I tell my kids sometimes I'll be sitting there and I'll just get a smile on my face, and they'll say, "What do you think? Why did you just smile?" And I said, "I just love being alive. Like it's just fun, like to experience. Like look what's around us right now." So in some ways, the acceptance of death and the finiteness of this physical body and this experience can make some of these things even more precious and more fun to enjoy. So I appreciate you sharing that aspect.
Yeah.
Um,
I can definitely resonate with catching Derek just smiling to himself. I remember a few moments like that.
yeah, yeah. Um, in wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to share that has anything to do with your journey, reaching a more peaceful or happy state in life, your navigation of this journey?
Um, I, you kind of hit on it earlier, but I think the last thing I would say is just trust yourself. Like we've been, you spend your whole life putting your trust in other people to make the decisions for you, to tell you what's right and wrong. And what I discovered is I kind of knew all along what was best for me. And when I really leaned into that and just trusted my gut and trusted who I was, that's when I started feeling the best. And I've also learned that because I know what's best for me, I also trust that other people know what's best for them. And I've been able to let go of judgment and have a lot more empathy for people who do things differently. And one of the things that was apparent quickly when I left was how other people who left the church who I was close to around me had very different ways of dealing with it than I did. And that was weird at first. Like my sister and one of my good friends, they both got into like these weird like theories of, afterlife or what's out in space, or it's just like, and for me, I was like, well, I don't care about anything that's like theoretical. I'm done with, like I said earlier, I just want what is actually real. But for them, it was actually really meaningful to explore like these kind of ideas that were off limits before, because you can only believe what the church tells you. They found a lot of satisfaction and peace in exploring ideas that they weren't allowed to explore before. And for them, that was what they needed to kind of move on to their next phase. And I think all of that just kind of made me realize, like, once we give ourselves our authority back, like that's something you can trust. Like you can trust yourself to take care of yourself. So whatever you're feeling needs to happen is probably what needs to happen, and it doesn't have to look the same as your neighbor or anyone else. And that's why I love that you and your family are doing this 2 year road trip around the country, because A, you can, and two, that's what you guys want to do. And that might not be right for everyone, and that's fine too. Like, I think it's so cool that you're doing it and that it's working for you.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great point to wrap up on. I'm so glad that you brought that up. To learn to trust ourselves and to trust others. And I think if all of us could do that a little bit more, I think we would experience a ton more peace and happiness in life.
Amen.
Well, thank you,
That's
Jordan.
awesome.
I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time and sharing your story. If anyone is interested in reaching out and talking to you or learning anything more, do you have any way to contact you that you're open to sharing?
I'm not really on anything, but you can shoot me a text or email me. I don't care. Tell Derek to call me.
Okay, that's thank you again. Thank you for your time. I think it's great hearing each other's stories, and the big takeaways that I have from today are recognizing that there isn't just one path, that there's not black and white, and the more that we can embrace that and we can learn to trust ourselves and trust others in that journey, the more peace that we can experience. during this life. So thank you everyone for listening, and we will catch you next time.